Good morning and welcome back to UVC Chronicles by UVC Graduates Association. I'm Greeshma and today with us is a very vibrant personality with an itch to reach out to the younger side of the population. Ma'am is a prolific author with titles ranging from the Bhagavad Gita for children to a book about prominent ideas in medicine. So that's uh, slightly dissonant topics, but she's picked both of those topics and written very well. I've picked up one of those books. Roopa Pai, ma'am, from the batch of 1992 EC, is here with us today. Could you please tell us more about yourself, ma'am?
Hi, Greeshma. It's wonderful to be here on the UVC podcast, Graduates Association podcast. Honored to be a guest here. Yes, I passed out in 1992, and I'm glad you picked up one of my books and uh, read it. I have now written over, I think, close to 30 books for children. Most of them are for children, maybe a couple for adults, that too in the recent past. But otherwise, I've always written for children. And I noticed that you said that the Gita for children and a book on medicine seem to be on dissonant. There's some dissonance in the kind of choice of theme. How can the same person be interested in both? But what my discovery has been through my 30-year journey as a children's writer has been that there is really no difference between any field of study from any other field at all. They're all just leading up to the same holistic eventual truth of our lives and our existences and all the rest of it. And it's just different approaches to the same subject. Um, a little bit about myself. I was a very, very reluctant engineer. I just happened to do well in my 12th grade. I definitely wanted to do English literature. I was very clear from the time I was 8 or 9 that I wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and I knew by the time I was 13 or 14 that I wanted to be a writer of Indian stories for Indian children. But engineering was a kind of detour. I know it's usually that engineering is something people do, and during those 4 years there, they truly discover themselves. It's a very Bangalore tradition. It's a rite of passage that you all join engineering, and by the end of it, you discovered what your true purpose is, and then that's what you start to do. But in my case, it was I knew what my true purpose was, but I had to do engineering as a detour because my mum believed that her daughters should have professional degrees under their belt so that they would always be able to stand on their own feet financially and never have to depend on a man. And that is why I sort of did it for her. And, really at that time, as an 80s child, there really wasn't much choice. I mean, you guys today are so lucky. You have so much choice of career. I don't know, sometimes I feel this too much choice is also a problem because you're never sure what you want to do. But again, even in this example, we can see that the truth is the same. Even your circumstances may be different, you have more choice. Our circumstances were different, we had less choice. But in the end, we have to just work on ourselves only to find out whether you have a lot of choice or you have very little choice. In the end, you have to do the work on yourself to know how you would like to spend your days and weeks and months and years. So I finished my engineering, and then almost immediately after that, went off to Delhi to take my first job as a children's writer in a magazine that was iconic at that time, at least for me. It was called Target Magazine, and it was an Indian magazine for children. Unfortunately, its success has never been replicated. After Target closed down, we haven't had, at least not to my knowledge, a great pan-Indian children's magazine in English in India. So, while at Target, I learned how to write for children. I mean, I suppose I had some talent for it, but it was honed and brought to some kind of, made into a kind of craft by a fantastic editor that it was my great pleasure and privilege and honor to work with as my first editor. Her name is Vatsala Kaul Banerjee, and she continues to be my editor today through several books that I have written. So that's a little bit about me.
That was quite an interesting introduction, ma'am. And I was your. I'm not sure I entirely agree with your ideas of the fact that we have much more of a choice. I mean, while we do have a lot more choice, I guess the freedom being a Bangalorean is still slightly restricted with respect to career.
Yeah, that I agree. Yes.
But so, being a reluctant engineer, what was your time at UVC like?
So it was still fun because I had a bunch of girlfriends that I completely loved, and they made my 4 years there really fun and enjoyable. And of course, the teachers were always good in UVC. And to people outside who saw me as a person, as a student who was studying at UVC, I was an object of great envy and admiration. They said, "Oh, wow, you go to UVC." And within my own family as well, my dad was an alumnus of UVC as well. So there was that connection at home. So it was all in all those ways it was fantastic. I ended up doing quite okay, even though I was kicking and screaming and resisting it so much, but I ended up doing quite okay academically speaking. And I really used my time to take part in a lot of cultural activities, intercollegiate activities within college activities. So yeah, and that sitting around in that quadrangle was really lovely under the shade of those beautiful trees. And my four girls and I used to do that a lot. A lot of times we were just sitting around there and enjoying it, and then walking to the canteen and having badami aloo. And yeah, so I did have quite a good time. And then later in life, now when I talk to children, I tell them that I have used that knowledge, or I mean, I have really benefited from staying with science, and for 4 more years beyond 12th grade, and and studying engineering, because it what I think the chief skill that I got, life skill that I got out of my engineering college, was the ability to take in large amounts of very intimidating data, information, and then learn how to divide it up, structure it in a way that I could understand it, it was accessible to me, and I could write and examine it. And that skill has helped me write my different kinds of books for children, because I always enter into as you mentioned, I've written a book on medicine, on the history of medicine. I've written a book on economics, a subject I had never studied in school or college. I've written a book on life skills for children. I've written a book on, let's see, what else have I written? On the Vedas and the Upanishads, the Gita. I've written a book on popular science. I've written books on history, mathematics, children's books. And not all of them have to do with science, but the skill that I got of approaching a new subject that I knew nothing about with some kind of humility and openness, and trusting that it would reveal itself to me if I only paid it attention and if I gave it my focus and hard work. I think that has been very good for me. It has held me in good stead in my writing career. So I have thought about it after I passed out, and with such relief I passed out of UVC and went off to Delhi to join Target magazine. But in later years, I've come back to think that nothing that we do in life is ever a wasted activity, is ever a waste of time, is nothing to regret, because you always learn something from every single event in your life, and you have to trust that there is a lesson in it and go on, instead of just wallowing in misery that I wasted 4 years, I could have been doing something else. Yes, but then you would not have the life that you are having now, and your life just now is wonderful if you put the right lens on it.
That's a very admirable perspective, actually. And it's very nice to see that you have put in so much effort through the years, and all of this information processing that you're doing in the background, all of that is very visible in your books, actually. I really, really loved the vocabulary that you used, the absolute depth of research that you put in, and your book from slugs to leeches from leeches to sluglu, I'm sorry. I picked it up on Wednesday, I think, and I'm almost done with the book.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really, really proud of that book actually, because really it was a subject that I knew nothing about, except that my sister was a doctor and I've always been fascinated with doctors. But I never wanted to be one, that was for sure. So when my mom gave us the option, like, give us the choice, medicine or engineering, I was very, very clear I wasn't going to be messing around with human bodies. I definitely wanted inanimate things as far as possible to study and all that. But I'm so happy that you enjoyed the book, because I was fascinated when I researched, and I am glad that has come through to the reader.
Yeah, it was a beautiful book and something definitely to be very proud of. And
Thank you, Grisha.
so, ma'am, when you're picking up a new project, what is your thought process as a writer?
So, actually, I think, so let me tell you the sort of chronology. So, the first books, I've been writing for children for very long in magazines and newspapers and small picture books, etc. But I really went into like large books after both my children were born, and then I was like, and then I was not so bogged down, and I had some free time when they both went off to school. That's when I started actually writing books. And my first set of books was called Taranauts, which is a fantasy adventure, a sci-fi kind of fantasy adventure series set in a parallel universe called Mithya. And this has been my dream from when I was a little girl reading Enid Blyton, that I wanted to write a fantasy adventure kind of series, but it would have not goblins, not dragons, not gnomes, no Western magical creatures. It would have creatures drawn from Indian mythology or from our own glorious heritage. So that's why I wrote the Taranauts is Taranauts, like astronaut. So, but Taranauts. So there's a lot of words in these books, in Taranauts books, that are amalgamations of Indian language words and English words, and they are part of a language that they speak on Mithya, on the parallel universe of Mithya, and that language is called Tara tongue, and all the rest of it. Anyway, so I wrote there are 8 books in the series, and by the time, and it apparently, as it turns out, when I finished the 8th book, what I was told was that this was actually the very first fantasy adventure series for children in English in India. There was no other before, and even to date, there isn't another one. Anyway, so that was my first thing. I followed that up by saying I'm completely fictioned out, and I have no more creative juices left to come up with a fiction book, so let me try non-fiction. And that's when I went back to my science education and wrote a book on popular science called What If the Earth Stopped Spinning and 24 Other Mysteries of Science. And again, at the end of that, I was like, again at a loose end, thinking, what am I going to write about next? And that's when my editor said to me, why don't I have a great idea for you? And I said, yeah, please tell me, because I am completely out of ideas. And she said, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write the Bhagavad Gita for children? And that was like, my jaw really hit the floor. I said, are you kidding me? I'm a cool author. I don't write about religious books. I'm not that kind of person, etc. I write fun stuff. And anyway, the Gita is not meant for children. All this I told her, and she said, but have you read it? Have you ever read the Gita? And I had to admit that I had not. And why I was saying no so much was because I was hugely intimidated by the task. I didn't know Sanskrit. I had never studied Sanskrit in school. And I said, how am I going to be somebody who has no grounding in either in Sanskrit or in the Gita? How am I going to take a book like that, a text like that, and reinterpret it for children? I mean, that's a huge responsibility. I certainly am not up to it, and I'm not going to do it. And to cover up my own insecurities, I told her that, oh, it's not meant for children and stuff like that. I mean, I truly believed that also at that time, that it was meant for old people. But then she caught me out and said, like, hello, please read it once. And at the end of it, if you tell me that it's really something's wrong with the text, or it's very patriarchal, or it's casteist, or it's not meant for children, it's too much about death. If you have any such issues, some reservations, tell me, and then I'll give it to somebody else. But I think you should at least read it, because I believe that you have a great talent for demystifying complicated concepts for children. So I took on the challenge. I began to read the text through some English commentaries by Indians and by foreigners, which were lent to me by an aunt of mine. And actually, my primary text of reference turned out to be Dr. Radhakrishnan's Bhagavad Gita, his commentary. And I began to read it, and I was so charmed by the text that I said, my goodness, I don't know why I haven't read it all these years, and this has to go out. There's nothing religious about it. It's a text of most secular wisdom, and it's meant for anyone in the world of any age. So once that sort of flipped a switch in my head, I think. So after that, I began to choose subjects, especially because I didn't know anything about them. Because I said I have all these stereotypes and prejudices in my head. The Gita has helped me break through a lot of them, and now I must use this as my guiding light to go after other subjects that I also have prejudices about and write about them. So that's usually how I choose my subjects to write. Something that I don't know anything about, something that I feel is needs talking about. Because about the medicine book, I realized that students of medicine, MBBS students, do not have a subject called medical history that they study. So they themselves are not aware of the legacy they are carrying on of how many great men and women sacrificed how much to come up with with a science that we today know as modern medicine. They're not aware of that. They know how to treat. They know how to treat disease, but they're not so much aware about wellness or health or history of medicine. And this was told to me by the doctor who released my book. He said, "I wish we had this book as a textbook in the first year of MBBS." So these are the reasons why I choose the books I write. Most recently, the book I've written is called Cubbon Park. It's for adults, and it's again the first history of Cubbon Park ever written in English, at least. So I was like, wow, and I chose it because it is the one place in Bangalore that has held me from the time I was a little kid riding on the Putani Express till today when I take my dog there for a run twice a week. So, Bangalore is another of my grand passions. So I write a lot about Bangalore, and I part of an organization called Bangalore Walks that leads children and adults on history walks around Bangalore. And so these are the many reasons why I choose. I've written about sport because I admire Indian sportsmen tremendously, sportswomen even more. So I've written about that as well. So it just depends on what is making me happy or curious at the moment.
It's personally speaking, I really enjoy the fact that you have so many diverse interests actually. It's I feel like if I was a kid and if I'd come across your books at that point in time, I would have just absolutely gobbled them up.
Thank you, Greeshma.
Even now, I just did. I mean, I'm almost done with your book, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to pick your fantasy series next.
You must. You will love it.
I will absolutely love it. The last children's fantasy book I read was this year actually, and
Was which one?
Philip Pullman's His Dark
Lovely,
Materials.
lovely.
Yeah, I finished that in 3 days.
Oh,
All the three
okay.
books.
One of those crazy readers. I used to be one.
So yeah, um, and I also have another question for you that I'm not really sure has a very structured answer maybe, but
No
okay.
problem.
As a reader personally, there is I generally want to stick to children's or teenagers books because adult books, especially adult fiction, has a lot of world weariness. I think
A lot of?
world weariness, like they're all tiring.
Yeah, that's true.
And your books were very. Your books gave me the vibe of Neil Gaiman actually. It's
Oh
a
my
shift,
God.
yeah.
I'm over the moon. I'm grinning. I'm grinning like a loon, and I'll keep grinning through the weekend. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, you absolutely should. What do you think about this? Is this why you picked children's books, or was there another reason?
I'll tell you why I picked children's books. Actually, there's a very, very good reason, and it's a very personal reason. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have access to as many different authors as children do today. I had never heard of Roald Dahl, Dr. Seuss, any of these American authors until I was well and truly an adult. So we were fed, we grew up, at least I grew up on a steady diet of Enid Blyton. Okay, and then there were, so that was my portal to England, to the UK, that to Britain. Britain was Enid Blyton. Whatever Britain she showed me was Britain in my mind. Remember, this was before the internet, even before television. Actually, television came into my life only in 1982. I was already 12 then. So by that time, my worldview had already been formed through reading. And then what was my portal into American life? Archie's comics. That's all. So I imagined all Americans did was date each other and drink sodas and eat burgers in pop dates, and basically America was Riverdale to me. Riverdale was America. Yeah. And during my childhood there was another set of books that we had access to that children today do not, and those were Russian children's books. India and Russia had a very close, and the USSR had a very close relationship at that time, and you can see why people of my generation would totally sympathize with Dr. Jaishankar when he's saying we have a long relationship with Russia. We can't simply abandon them and start not buy gas from them and break our friendship with them because they attacked Ukraine. Because apart from the diplomatic level relationship, there is a deeper relationship between the people of India and Russia and the USSR and the former USSR, because we used to read their books a lot growing up. So those were the three worlds that I knew, and apart from that, there were no Indian authors writing in English about Indian children. So there wasn't that. But my window into Indian storytelling was Amar Chitra Katha. So I continue to completely adore Indian mythology, but it was true that I did not have representation as an Indian child in the books that I read. And the problem with that was, even though Enid Blyton wrote the most amazing books and taught me how to write and taught me a lot of my morals as well, the problem was that I grew up thinking that only British children had cool childhoods, and my childhood, simply because it was different from her children's childhoods, was somehow sucky. So this is what I grew up with, until I finally found Target magazine, which I eventually joined as a writer. But when I first came across it, for the very first time, I saw Indian stories, stories by Indian writers about Indian children like me, short stories. And all those stories had children who had exactly my kind of life, and they seemed to be having a glorious time. And I said to myself, oh my God, have I got it all wrong? Is my life also glorious in a very different way? It's just that I didn't see it because nobody told me that it was great. How silly. So, and that's when it hit me that there was such a wealth of writing to be done about stories set in Indian ethos, about Indian children, about our heritage, and not even heritage, need not be old stories, contemporary, our messy contemporary reality, which is so wonderful, even though it's so chaotic. Children have to be told this. They may not find this out by themselves, and that was why I decided to write children's books. And I said it has to be, and as you said, I still enjoy reading children's books and young adult books much more than I enjoy reading adult books. So there is a kind of innocence and hope and positivity and cheerfulness in children's books that adults' books are sadly lacking, and that is what I am as a person. I do lean towards hope always, and positivity. So it seemed to fit in with my nature and the need of the hour. So that is why I decided to be a children's writer.
That is another thing that I wanted to question you about. You mentioned that a lot of your inspiration was Indian mythology, and as a reader, as any reader would like good representation, I think it's a good idea to turn to our own authors rather than ask for representation from American ones.
Exactly. First of all, we ask for representation from others. Then we blame them of cultural appropriation if they don't represent us correctly. I mean, what do you want? You have a voice. You're empowered entirely. Tell your stories, right? I think we have to stop looking elsewhere for validation and for someone to do our work for us. We just have to pick up the shovel and start doing our own work. And own voice stories are anyway the best. Not that everybody in India has the same voice, definitely not. Yes, particularly in India, you're encouraged to have your own individual voice. So the point is, and what I want to tell people who are listening, maybe they're parents of young children, maybe they are young themselves. The point is to go out and look and actively look for books by Indian authors. I think now everybody knows about books by Sudhamurthy and Ruskin Bond, but look just a little beyond that, because in the 15 years since Taranauts came out, that time there were very few Indian writers writing for children in English. Now, Greeshma, there are hundreds, and their books are all languishing so many times because bookstores don't give them enough space, newspapers don't give them enough review space, column space for reviews, but they're there. If you just Google on the internet, and there are several independent bookstores in Bangalore and across India that stock Indian children's books. So I would urge everyone to make the effort, go out and look for books written by Indian authors and introduce your children and yourselves to them, and you will never be unhappy about that. I mean, you are doing yourself a favor, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's very sad to see the another slightly possibly political point here, but it's slightly sad to see the fact that in the name of social awakeness and awareness in general, wokeness perhaps, if I may say so, it's sad to see that people shy away from religious writings.
It is very silly, and especially Indian texts, ancient Indian texts, are not religious at all, really. I mean, and the only way to counter people who say that they're religious, or use it as leverage to get people around them, hating some other community or whatever, because of, all those things, is to go and explore them yourselves and not take anybody's word for it. Go and read them yourself. Go to the original texts. They're not so difficult. They are in Sanskrit, yes, but there are enough good commentaries on them. So don't listen to what this person says or that person says. Go and explore them for yourself. Come to your own decision. The whole, every Vedic Rishi urges, the whole point of the Vedas is to urge you to think for yourself and to question received wisdom. So if all of us does that in our own lives, we will see that the Indian philosophy is the most generous, liberal, secular philosophy that in fact asks everyone to lose that veil of ignorance that makes you see someone else as someone different from you. The othering of the other person should stop. We are all the same. What we have on top is superficial. What we eat, who we worship, these are just window dressing. Who we are inside is exactly the same. And the more you embrace the differences, the bigger you will become, the more whole you will be. If we can, anyone who reads the ancient text by himself or herself, you will see that that is the point of it. So then we will stop being sidetracked by people who will preach otherwise and tell us it teaches us to hate or something like that, or somebody else is terrible. No, we're all the same. And I wish actually that schools would introduce this kind of education sometimes, but it's a very sensitive thing, because it depends very much on who is interpreting it in the classroom at that point, and it could become very dangerous as well. I think because it could be dangerous, that's why we have been so wary of introducing it.
That is true. That is a good perspective on it. And books like the books that you've written, books like the Amachitra Katha, which I read a lot as well as a child, and another series of magazines by the same publication is Tinkle, which I
Tinkle.
really loved.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
beautiful books.
Tinkle
So
was a
all of
little
these,
after my time. Like, I think it started
uh,
maybe when I was already in my late teens. So
and all of these together, they make up our childhood very in a very Indian way, that we have to, I think we need to I think, and I think you also think the same. It's for you to have a build a very well-rounded identity, you need a good cultural rooting.
absolutely, absolutely. And we can truly admire or respect something else only when we have first I mean, we can even truly know anyone else only after we know ourselves. And that's even if you bring it down to an individual level, never mind the country or the community or the cultural heritage. Yourself, unless you know and love and respect yourself, you cannot love or know or respect anyone else. So, even with, and that same, if you just magnify it, it goes to the, I'll amplify it a little, it becomes that unless you know your culture and your roots and where you come from, how can you even hope to appreciate what someone else is? When you are strong in yourself, then you can appreciate somebody else. So yeah, it's very true, we have to be rooted, and then we have to be, then we can grow tall and strong and spread out and offer our shade to everybody else as well. you know
Absolutely, ma'am. And what you're doing is really great. It's very, very nice to see that authors are coming forward these days, putting their thoughts across, and trying to make a very real connection with all of our cultural roots. Especially in a day when identity is but a fleeting thing in the chaos of social
Very,
media.
very under threat, and it's become so much about fear, about protecting your identity against somebody else's and all that. It's not that. You only have to understand who you are so that you can love everybody else, not so that you can isolate yourself from others. That's a very, it feels like a contradiction in terms, but it's the truth.
And it's a nice thing to, as a human being, reach out to other people in times like this rather than just shut yourself.
Absolutely. Otherwise, how are we even human? How can we hope to call ourselves? How do we dare call ourselves human if we don't have the capacity of compassion? That's the only thing that makes us human.
Yes, ma'am. So, do you have any advice for the current humans?
No, I mean, that's all. That is really just my advice. That focus on yourself first. It sounds like a selfish thing to do, but it's not. It's only when you know yourself that you can know anybody else. And if you're going to look in the mirror in the morning and tell yourself negative stories about yourself, that negativity is going to go out and touch the world. And like Swami Vivekananda once is known to have said that, what right do you have to take that ugly face in the sense of, he meant like upset about something negative, that ugly face, and go out into the world. If you're annoyed about something or if you're frustrated about something, please sit inside the house. You have no right to go and infect the world with it. Go out when you're happy, and really our job in the world is just to be not even happy. Happy is a phase of, it's a transient thing. Happiness comes and goes. But to feel whole and grounded inside ourselves, to feel content, to be equanimous, if we can just practice that for ourselves, that love that you feel for yourself will spread out and embrace the world. Really, your only responsibility is to yourself. We cannot change the world to the extent that we want. So it's really what Gandhiji said, be the change. Or as Jesus said, my life is my message. uh, just live a life of goodness, and that is enough. Be a role model to everybody around you, and you've already done plenty. And just be compassionate, that's all. And not just to people of your people, but all people, all animals, all trees. We're very lucky to be born in a land that considers everything divine, everything. So, and in the Gita, Krishna says, the moment the man who can see, or the person who can see a piece of himself in everything around him and a piece of everything around him in himself, he is enlightened. He sees the whole world, the whole universe as himself. Then how would you want to hurt anybody or do anything mean to anybody? Because that will be like hurting yourself. So really, just that is a very, very long message and a very vague one, but I think that's really my message.
It may not be a very pointed one, but it's certainly a necessary one. I hope that your books and the thought process that you have, that is of the Sanatana Dharma and
Yeah.
the
Yes.
world being a family. I hope all of this reaches every kid in India,
Thank you,
and not
Greeshma.
just in
That's such a
India.
sweet wish, and I thank you very much for it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And we had a great time together, I
Yes,
think.
it was a great conversation.
Especially,
Thank you.
you said a lot of things that needed to be said in a lot of ways. And that, it, I mean, even though you said it very gently, it hit hard. So,
Thank you.
and I hope the readers who are going to listen to this podcast, I hope it resonates with you very well, just as it did with me. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with another episode of Chronicles. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.